Morning, everybody. It's 7 o'clock here in the UK. You are very welcome to spend your breakfast with us here at Sky News, wherever you're watching us around the world this morning. She's said that reducing the number of migrant crossings on the Channel is her #1 priority. And there are reports this morning that the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is about to deploy controversial tactics to achieve that. We'll talk about it in more detail in just a moment. Also ahead for you, how is the NHS holding up as the Prime Minister's tax hike is voted through Parliament? Figures due out this morning will give the latest indication of how badly more funding is needed. We'll have more on that. And this is great. Remember that, don't you? Yeah, you're singing along at home, aren't you? The man behind the music will meet one of the world's greatest songwriters, Nile Rodgers. That's at 8:30. It's Thursday, the 9th of September. Maritime manoeuvre reports suggest the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has sanctioned new tactics to send migrant boats in the Channel back to France. Stopping the conveyor belt to crime. The former Children's Commissioner tries to prevent vulnerable children falling into the hands of gangs. Cressida's critics as the Met Police Commissioner is offered a 2-year extension. An open letter accuses her of presiding over a culture of incompetence and cover-up. Remembering the 9/11 victims nearly 20 years on, Sky News speaks to loved ones of British people killed in the attacks.
This isn't about me, it's about trying to honour the day, remember the day.
And looking at the weather for you, it's been glorious, hasn't it? But the bright spells with thundery showers, feeling rather muggy today. Morning, everybody. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is reportedly considering controversial tactics to redirect some migrant boats back across the Channel. Several newspapers suggest officials are to be taught how to use pushback methods to turn larger boats around. It comes after a meeting with her French counterpart yesterday, in which Ms Patel said the British public expect to see results in bringing the number of crossings down. Representing the government this morning is the Care Minister, Helen Whately. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. I want to talk to you about care, obviously a big topic this week. But first, can I just ask you about those migrant boats, as much as you know? Are you really going to try and turn them around?
Well, the first thing here to remember is that migrants travelling on those boats or other routes like that to try and get to the UK are, of course, desperate. But we also know that's a desperately dangerous way. They're taking a really perilous journey to come to the UK. So we want to deter people from embarking on that kind of dangerous journey. We also know as they do it, then that puts money into the people smugglers' pockets, those organised international crime gangs. So the big question is, what are the ways that we can do, the measures we can take to stop people getting into boats and trying to get here this way? And actually, we have a separate approach to try and enable safe routes to get here for asylum seekers. So the government has been looking at a wide range of options, but particularly to working with the French. And for instance, an extra 54 million is due to go to the French so that they can put in place more border patrols and use more technology to try and stop people setting off in the first place.
Are we going to turn the boats around?
Well, I know the government looks at all the options, but I think a really important thing, of course, is you wouldn't want to put people in any greater danger. They're taking a dangerous journey as it is, and what we want to do is actually deter them from starting that journey in the first place.
Are we going to turn the boats around?
There's nothing more I can say to you in that beyond knowing that the government is looking at all the options.
Do you think it's a good idea?
We'll be right to do that. I think one thing that's really important...
Because it's against the law, of course, isn't it?
One thing that's really important is to think about the safety. Actually, we want... we don't want people to have any more danger on a journey they're taking to get here than they need to. But overall...
But turning them around is not going to make it less dangerous,
what we want to do...
it?
Well, what we want to do is deter people from taking that route. But actually, we do want to help people who are fleeing. For instance, the people we're helping come from Afghanistan.
Of course, I get that.
15,000 have arrived from Afghanistan.
My question is about the Channel today.
Help.
Of course, and I get that, and it was a fantastic job done by the RAF, as all of my viewers will know. But it's against maritime law to turn boats around. So why is the Home Secretary even suggesting it?
So what I know is that the government, the Home Secretary, is as you'd expect, I think, looking at all the options, it's desperately difficult. You know, I'm a Kent MP.
Including illegal ones.
And I know that migrants are turning up on the beaches not very far from my constituency. People see them arriving on many a warm day. So, of course, we should look at what are the options and do what's best. I think the really important thing here is the work that we're doing jointly with the French and to support the French to actually stop people leaving in the first place.
OK, well, the French are saying, don't be ridiculous, you can't turn the boats around. So we'll wait and see what happens as far as that is concerned. Let's move on to the topic that's very close to your heart, NHS and social care, of course. Looking at the figures, and my team pointed out to me this morning that the social care cap will help just 5% of elderly people receiving care. Is that right?
Well, what we're doing is we are embarking on once-in-a-generation reforms of social care. And just give the context and remind viewers, I'm sure people know this, but governments for decades have talked about reforming social care, and we are taking this big step. And what we're doing with the cap, well, let me just say, so at the moment...
We know all of that. You know, we've been talking about it for 3 or 4 days, so we're aware of the background. The question is it only helping 5% of people?
Well, that's not a number that I recognise.
OK.
What I can say is that we are putting in place that cap, which actually will give everybody peace of mind of knowing that whether it's somebody in their family or going to need care in the near future or in the longer term that you might need care, know that the limit of the amount that you would need to spend on your care would be £86,000. That gives everyone peace of mind. And we know that at the moment, 1 in 7 people receive care have a cost of over £100,000 for their care. Also, as part of this, and this helps even more people, we're raising the means test, the safety net at which you start getting help. So at the moment, you don't get help until you only have about £23,000 worth of assets. We're raising that to £100,000, so more people will get help soon.
OK, I'm never keen on talking numbers because it's a bit complicated in the morning when people are getting the kids ready for school, etc. But given that you brought up the 100,000, I'm told that the government, in fact, your figures, 1 in 7 people pay more than £100,000 for care. So that means 6 in 7 people don't. So what are you going to do for them?
So, I mean, firstly, to say the 6 and 7, they are worrying about it because you never know. So I don't know if you have any family members with dementia. Many people do.
Sadly,
I do.
All of my family members are dead, so no, sadly not.
I'm sorry, Kay. But many people do. And one of the worries there is the uncertainty. You just don't know how much care they're going to need and how long it's going to take. And therefore, you can't plan for it. So knowing what the maximum is does help people plan for bills that might come their way.
That's like, see, this is what you could have won. I mean, 6 out of 7 people do not qualify for it.
I was just coming. So firstly, I think actually that peace of mind, and I know from my inbox as a constituency MP as well as Care Minister, this is something that worries people a lot. The other thing to say is actually more than half of the funding that we've just announced for social care through our big reform is actually to go into wider reforms of the system. So, for instance, more funding for local authorities to help them pay a fair rate for care. At the moment, people who are self-funding, paying their own bills, are often subsidising the people who have local authority-funded care, which is often at a lower rate. We're going to give more funding to local authorities so they can pay a fair rate of care. We're also going to be putting over £500 million into workforce training and development to really support our work. And their care workforce is just fantastic. Yeah. We want them to be more valued, have more training, more career development opportunities, and this will raise the quality of care for everybody too.
OK, you talked about care workers. There are, I think, 120,000 vacancies. How are you going to fill those?
Well, we have been working with the sector, with Skills for Care, which is the organisation which looks at the workforce particularly and works with government on this. In the short term, we have, for instance, been doing marketing campaigns promoting career care as a career. But we know that there is high turnover in the care sector. That's one reason why we're putting this huge amount of money, the £500 million I just mentioned, into a skills and development programme. I know from speaking to staff in job centres, one thing they say about people, and they talk about social care jobs, is, well, I don't see where the career will get me. I don't see a career path. So we want to build that kind of career path with opportunities for people to gain the skills and really feel valued in their work as they do it.
It doesn't help that you're forcing them to have double jabs if they don't want to.
I know this is a really difficult question. I mean, the situation here is, your viewers will know, that care homes have had such a tough time in this pandemic. and that we have very sadly seen many residents in care homes die from COVID because they are the most vulnerable. It has to be the right thing to do, to give them the best
That was because they
possible
were sent home from
protection.
hospitals when they had COVID because they weren't being tested in the
This
early
wasn't
years
this,
of the pandemic.
This actually, and there's been lots of research done on that, and actually this wasn't the main source of COVID getting into care homes. The reality is that one of the best ways we can protect people living in care homes is through making sure that staff are vaccinated. Yes, the ongoing testing and staff are tested weekly is important as well,
Sure.
but vaccination is a really important part of protecting those who live in care homes. And now I've talked to whether it's residents themselves or the family members. They really want the family members living in care homes to have the most protection, and that's to be looked after by staff who are vaccinated.
You acknowledge, though, that that number, 120,000, that's just going to get worse, isn't it?
I know that the sector faces huge numbers of vacancies and that there is a large amount of
But it's going to get worse in the
turnover.
short term because there's quite a lot of people who don't want to be vaccinated.
Well, actually, already 90% of workers in care homes have been vaccinated. There's still time to get vaccinated. And actually,
But what if they don't want to?
I'd say to anyone watching this today who hasn't yet been vaccinated, go and get the jab. For care workers, they've got until the 16th of September to have their first jab, and then still that gives time before November the 11th to have the second jab. So there's still time. Go and get vaccinated, and then you're both protecting yourself and those that you look after.
And what if they don't?
Well, it has to be the right thing to do. I
But
know
what if
that
they
there will be
don't,
small
Minister?
numbers who don't. I mean, there are if someone has a medical exemption, a medical reason for not being vaccinated, well, that's a different matter, of course.
But what about the others that don't? What will happen to them on the 11th of November?
I mean, the big question has to be, well, if you don't want to get vaccinated, how can you continue? How can it be right to continue to look after people who are really vulnerable from COVID?
So they will lose their jobs, and that will make the issue of how many people are employed and the number of vacancies in care homes even worse, yeah? I mean, it will.
That is
it's
why,
an actual fact, isn't it?
But that is why we're working particularly. We know
you acknowledge that,
there
Minister,
is.
don't you?
Yes, I acknowledge that in areas where there are some care homes where the vaccination rates are lower. Some good number have got actually 100% all of their staff are vaccinated, but that's not consistent. That's why we're working with local authorities, and local authorities in turn are working with care homes where the rates are lower to really help their staff have the confidence, if they haven't had the confidence to get vaccinated yet, to go and get that jab.
Just to labour this point, and then we'll move on to others, there are 120,000 plus vacancies at the moment. That is going to get worse after the 11th of November because those who refuse to be double vaccinated will lose their jobs.
Well, we'll see. We constantly see a level of turnover in care homes in the social care sector. Actually, that's one reason why we're doing this social care reforms, and as I mentioned, that big investment in the workforce, building up people's skills and the career path to try and reduce the constant turnover you see of people coming in and out of jobs in the care sector. We want to make it a long-term career. So that's the long-term direction of travel. What we're also going to see in the next few weeks is some people, for instance, coming off furlough, looking for jobs. So there is movement in the jobs market. And so actually there's a lot going on to make sure that care homes do have the staff that they need.
OK, but just to make the point, if on the 11th of November, people who are presently working in care homes don't have 2 vaccinations and a certificate to prove that, they're out of work.
Well, so the care home have to follow their own process. We've given guidance to the care homes about how to support staff through
Just
this.
say yes or no, Minister. It is a yes or no question.
I mean, I think it's quite clear. Of course, I recognise that there will be a number of people who really, really don't want to get vaccinated, and the care home they're working for will be able to look and see whether they can work, for instance, not in a front line or not in the care home. But I know that those jobs, most jobs in care home are on the site, in the premise. And so for some people, continuing to work in a care home won't be the right thing for them. But this has to be the right thing to do to best protect those really vulnerable people who live in care homes and are most at risk from COVID.
How do you feel about NHS managers earning something like £275,000 a year?
Yeah, I've seen a headline on that today, clearly. I think taking a step back, people working in the NHS in those kind of roles are taking on a lot of responsibility. They're big jobs, and they're moving from having more senior managers in the NHS to fewer through doing this. The NHS reckons that it needs to have that level of pay to have the right people in those jobs. But I do think, and the government keeps a really close eye on making sure that NHS money is spent carefully and appropriately, because we want as much of the funding to go.
Funding?
Well, we want as much of the funding as possible to go to the front line. And for instance, for me,
Is it something like twice what you earn?
It is significantly more than I earn. So I don't want to see NHS managers being paid unacceptable levels. And the NHS does need to be very careful with.
Because you almost
its
started
money.
by saying it was unacceptable, didn't you? And then
Well, I completely recognise your reaction, the public's reaction, saying, goodness, look at that big number. Of course, we do want to have really top people taking on the responsibility, driving forward some of the reforms that we need in the NHS, getting down the backlog where we just voted through last night, 16 billion extra funding to help the NHS get through the
level
backlog.
of responsibility that you've got, though, in your job, and, it's almost twice your salary.
Well, thank you for pointing out
it's true, though, isn't it?
What I do in my job. But, I think I wouldn't sort of compare them directly like that. There's a very different line of work. But, what I really care about is making sure right now we get all those backlogs down the NHS, all those people waiting, for over 5 million people waiting for operations, for treatment in the NHS at the moment. We voted through 16 billion more for the NHS last night to get down that backlog. We want the NHS to recover from the pandemic. Clearly, they are still looking after people with COVID as well, to get through this and make sure that we have the NHS always there for people when they need it.
Beautiful blue jacket on this morning. How do you feel about being called Blue Labour?
Actually, I think we made a difficult decision last night, clearly. And as a Conservative, voting for a tax rise, it's not something you do lightly. We want people's money to be in their pockets. People
Does it sit comfortably with you, tax rises?
So, of course, I don't want us to raise tax, but we had a really difficult choice here. So at the moment, we've got over 5 million people on NHS waiting lists. That's projected to potentially get to 13 million. That could be about 1 in 5 people waiting for an operation. That's a terrible position to be in. Coupled with, for me as Care Minister, we know we desperately need to do social care reform, and governments for decades have not been able to work out the way to fund that, to move that forward. So what we've got here is a package that means we can both treat all those people who need treatment under the NHS, and we can embark on those once-in-a-generation social care reforms.
Okay. It really is a very beautiful jacket. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you today, speaking to Dr. Shola and Scottie about Texas's new controversial abortion legislation. That's at 7:30 this morning. What direction should the vaccine rollout go next? I'm going to be speaking to Professor Sunetra Gupta at Oxford University at 7:45.
And there's nothing you can say to me. Yeah. We're all on the grind.
8:45, Big Zoo joins us to discuss the challenges young people are facing post-COVID. Growing numbers of children were being excluded from school before the pandemic, according to the latest government data. And with schools returning to normal, experts are warning that exclusions are expected to spike. It comes as the former Children's Commissioner launches a new initiative to stop what she calls a conveyor belt of vulnerable children leaving school and falling into the hands of gangs and criminals. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, reports.
Think about the beginning and the end.
English teacher Daniel has stepped out of mainstream education for 2 years to teach at Haringey's Learning Partnership in North London for children who've been excluded from school.
They have no punishment, really, do they?
But he's the one learning the lesson, how to keep these kids in the system.
Okay, so, for example, what is the next? More of that knowledge will help mainstream colleagues to become more preemptive, to spot the signs, perhaps, of trauma, to identify the risks that young people might experience and try and mitigate those earlier.
Year 10 student Miriam was excluded from 2 secondary schools for disruptive behaviour, but says mainstream schools never explored the root causes of her problems.
If you're happy to explain anything that's wrong at home to your school, that makes life easier, because let's say something happens at home, you come in school, you're upset, and you let all the anger and upset out. Then you're happy to go in to learn, you've got a good mindset, everything's fine, and you're ready to get some education in. But if you come in, there's no one to talk to you, there's no support, you go into your lesson, you're not ready to learn, you're still upset from what's going on at home.
Analysis of the most recent Department of Education data shows that school exclusions were on the rise just prior to the first lockdown, up 5% generally, up 20% in primary schools. Now, whilst there's been a lull due to the disruption caused to schools by the pandemic, it's feared that that has also created the conditions for exclusions to continue to rise. The former Children's Commissioner is launching a new commission to look at ways of stopping children falling into gangs. One aspect, keeping them in mainstream education.
We know that COVID has dealt a real blow to a lot of those kids. It's meant that the vulnerabilities they've experienced, often at home, addiction, domestic violence, have increased. And a lot of them also aren't connecting back into school. So they're at risk of falling off the radar.
4% of excluded young people are likely to get a pass in GCSE English and Maths. And when we look into the longer term, we know that even by age 20, young people still might not have the literacy and numeracy qualifications they need to access the labour force.
Miriam hopes to buck that trend. She responded to being excluded from school by raising £2,500 to open her pupil referral unit's first library.
Thank you so much to David for coming back today.
The opening this week attended by local MP David Lammy and author Michael Rosen.
I named this library the library.
Her exclusion was mainstream's loss. How often is that the case? Jason Farrell, Sky News.
What was the boat used to be called? Is it Boat Face? And the library could maybe be called Library... I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. It's early, isn't it? An open letter has been sent to Boris Johnson urging for the Metropolitan Police Commissioner to be replaced. Critics who signed the letter have accused Dame Cressida of presiding over a culture of incompetence and cover-up. It comes after reports suggested she had been offered a 2-year extension to her contract. Among the high-profile signatories were Baroness Doreen Lawrence, mother of Stephen Lawrence, who was killed in a racist attack back in 1993, and also Lady Diana Britton, whose husband was falsely accused of child abuse as part of Operation Midlands. North Korea celebrated its 73rd anniversary of its foundation with a military parade. The pictures show large crowds of people in orange hazmat suits, as well as security forces marching in Pyongyang. Unlike last year, Kim Jong-un did not give a speech, and there were no ballistic missiles on display. The Taliban says it will allow 200 Americans and other civilians to leave Afghanistan on charter flights. A US official said a flight is expected to leave Kabul airport today.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Most places will see a mix of bright spells and heavy thundery showers today. It won't be as hot as recent days, but will feel rather humid.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So, which was the last British woman to win a major tennis title? Unless you correct me, I think I'm right in saying that it was Virginia Wade. And it was in 1977, as I recall, because it was the Queen's Silver Jubilee. OK, there you go. Now, it's 20 years, wow, says my director, Amy. Now, it's 20 years since, Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial planes packed with passengers and flew them into targeted buildings in New York and Washington. For those watching live on television, time seemed to stand still.
Now, some very, very sketchy details reaching us here at Sky Centre. Important enough to bring to you, though, at this early stage. We believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center in New York.
20 years ago. We'll have full coverage of the 9/11 attack 20 years on from 5 p.m. on Friday. I'm going to be in New York for you, heading to the airport after the programme that evening, Friday evening, and then all day on Saturday for you from 9 a.m. in the morning. Among a host of names that we will be speaking to is Lynn Tierney, the New York City Fire Department's Deputy Commissioner at the time of the attacks, who was caught in the collapse and nearly lost their life. We'll also be speaking to the former mayor of Gander. Do you remember why Gander was important as far as 9/11 is concerned? All these questions for you this morning. Also to come, Dr. Shola and Scottie about Texas's new controversial abortion legislation. That to come in just a moment.
We did the surgery last week in Israel. The surgery went well. We're delighted to say the girls are doing really well at this early stage. I mean, all conjoined twin procedures are complicated, but on a spectrum of the ones we've done, one of the lesser complicated ones. With all these surgeries, there's always the risk of losing one or both children at the time of the surgery. So that risk was there with this set as well. And the other risks of causing injury to the brain, the blood vessels, causing a stroke. It's a high stakes undertaking. We're delighted to see they're doing so well at this stage. It's still early days, though. You know, one does need to wait a few weeks at least to make sure there are no infections or any other complications. But, you know, there's every reason to be optimistic at the moment. Well, we believe that there's probably about a dozen or so kids born globally every year. And whilst we're really fortunate here in the UK, we've managed to gather the world's largest experience with our team of 5 cases now. Most centres, most countries in the world would not have dealt with such a scenario. So the whole idea is, you know, whilst it's well and good that we can do these surgeries, it doesn't really benefit the children, let's say, born in Africa or other parts of the world at this stage. So the whole concept of the charity was, how do we collate all the learning that we have got in this country in our team, and how do we disseminate and thereby help the kids and the families in other parts of the world? That was the focus of the charity. With Gemini Unwind, we have a website, and please do visit the website. It tells you about the work we do and how we are at the moment trying to help other families that are in this position. So we're actively helping other families in this situation as we speak.
It's estimated that around 70% of our coastlines are experiencing increased erosion. We start with a steel structure that we put into the seafloor. We then pass a very small electrical current between what we call an anode and the cathode, and the structure itself is the cathode.
Hello again. You're watching The Breakfast Programme here on Sky News. In the last few moments, I've been speaking to the Social Care Minister, Helen Whately. She defended the government's decision to make jabs compulsory for care home staff, with the 11th of November, the cut-off date for those working in a care setting to have received both vaccinations.
Well, if you don't want to get vaccinated, how can you continue? How can it be right to continue to look after people who are really vulnerable from COVID?
So they will lose their jobs, and that will make the issue of how many people are employed and the number of vacancies in care homes even worse, yeah? I mean, it will.
That is
it's
why,
an actual fact, isn't it?
But that is why we're working particularly... we know
you acknowledge that, Minister,
there is,
don't you?
Yes, I acknowledge that in areas where there are some care homes where the vaccination rates are lower, some good number have got actually 100% all of their staff are vaccinated, but that's not consistent. That's why we're working with local authorities, and local authorities in turn are working with care homes where the rates are lower to really help their staff have the confidence, if they haven't had the confidence to get vaccinated yet, to go and get that jab.
Tamara's with us. What do you think, Tamara?
Well, interesting from Helen Whately, because the whole of the care sector's response to this announcement has been concern that not enough of the money will be funneled into social care, and that it doesn't tackle one of the really big issues, which is the fact that the social care sector is so desperately lacking in people working there. As you were pointing out to her, over 100,000 vacancies, and they're saying that one of the things that makes things difficult is this requirement for them to, by November, have had 2 vaccinations. Most care staff have, the vast majority have, but in some areas there will be care homes where a lot of people haven't. And actually, interestingly, today the government have announced they're consulting on whether all NHS staff, that's over 1 million people, should have had 2 jabs. And if they don't, the implication would be that they lose their jobs. So she says it's very important to protect people in care homes that everyone has 2 vaccines, but certainly it's not going to help with the recruitment crisis, driven by a lot of factors, including Brexit and other things. But certainly that's something that she, as Care Minister, will need to sort out.
2 other brief points. £275,000 for a job in the NHS. What did you think about that? And also the boats being turned round to head straight back to France?
Yes, interesting on that, because I'm hearing that the Home Office have actually been working for some months training Border Force to turn some boats back in order that the French Coast Guard would have to get them and not the British Coast Guard. Of course, in international maritime law, you have to safeguard life. So there wouldn't be many cases where an individual boat commander could decide to do this. But that's what the Home Office want to do. We understand that the Border Force have been training for this for months, that Priti Patel has authorised it and believes that in certain circumstances within the existing law, it could work, but probably not many cases. And of course, it's incredibly high risk since the French authorities are not on board with it. What Helen Whately said about highly paid people in the NHS, we understand they're advertising jobs at £270,000. She said there aren't many of them. They want to reduce the number of managers and that these are incredibly responsible, high-level jobs. But I think this speaks to a wider point that Tory MPs are concerned about. Yes, they voted through the tax rises last night, but I think a lot of them have doubts that the NHS is being tied to specific commitments for this money. It's all just come about very quickly, and there hasn't really been a wider conversation about what the NHS is going to achieve, because you'll remember under New Labour, when they gave the NHS billions of pounds, there was concern that a lot of it ended up going on salaries rather than expansion of care.
OK, for now. Thanks, Tamara. Thank you. The US Supreme Court has refused to block a Texas law banning abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, the country's most far-reaching curb on abortions in half a century. The Texas law, signed by the Republican governor, Greg Abbott, in May, prohibits abortions once medical professionals can detect a fetal heartbeat, usually at about 6 weeks, and before most women even know that they are pregnant. That and other topics now with political and women's rights activist Dr. Shola and also our US political commentator, Scottie. Hello to you both. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning, ladies. Let's start with that abortion rule, because for a lot of women in the UK, it's unfathomable. Scottie, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts is it's not that this is reducing Roe versus Wade, as a lot of pro-abortion advocates have made. It just simply says once a heartbeat is felt, which is what a majority of those of faith believe that that's when that life begins, you cannot murder the baby, which is usually around 5 to 6 weeks. There are exceptions within that rule. That includes rape. That includes places where the mother's life is in danger. It's like any other pro-life stance. It's just in this case, this is the first government, this is the first state that's actually put this restriction. And like I said, it's 5 to 6 weeks. By then, most women, especially if they have been in an emergency situation like a rape or a place, they have kept track of what is going on and realize that there is something going on with their body and can receive the proper medical attention. That, I think, this has just been a big ordeal made, because I think there's a lot of pro-choice people that are very much afraid that the Roe versus Wade is being reversed, and that's not what this law does.
Okay, so that's categorically, unequivocally wrong. This
heartbeat bill. Why do they call it a heartbeat bill? What's wrong with that?
Speaking, Scottie. So this bill is totally anti-choice. It is not pro-life. This bill is just another example of more fundamental Christian extremists trying to force their views on other people. This bill has 0 exceptions, which is why Greg Abbott said, well, women, don't worry about it because we're going to eliminate rape. It has no exceptions for rape. And that statement he made about eliminating rape by getting rid of every rapist on the street is so obtuse and speaks to the rape culture that this Republican Party is absolutely promoting. So let us be clear. This bill, it does overturn Roe v. Wade. It is now encouraging other states in the United States to do the same, other Republican states to do the same. This bill is purely about controlling women's bodies. This bill is purely about blaming women and making them carry the burden that men have. It doesn't recognize that men have a role to play here. Why is there not?
How angry you are about it? It's 6 weeks. It's not from the first. It's from 6 weeks, the time that you feel a heartbeat. And by then, if you are raped, you will know in 6 weeks whether or not you're pregnant or not. You are paying attention to what is going on. And this isn't advocating for the life of the baby, a female baby. So there could be this is advocating for life.
Get to tell.
That's absolutely false what you're saying.
Dr. Shola answer, if you wouldn't mind, please, Scottie. Dr. Shola, go on.
Scottie, you don't get to tell other women that they should know what's going on with their bodies. With my first child, I didn't know I was pregnant until I was 4 months pregnant. That doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention. It just means our bodies react and behave differently with pregnancies. You don't take that choice away. And 6 weeks is not 6 weeks. You should know that. You know how the menstrual cycle works. You know for a fact that for some women, it's regular, it's irregular. At some point in time, it reduces. So no, it is not 6 weeks. Women have and should have total control of their bodies and should determine as and when they want to have children. If you want to talk about controlling and stopping abortions, then why don't you focus on men? Why don't we mandate that men have vasectomies, which can be reversed? Why don't we put the blame and burden on men?
Let Scottie come in, please. Shola, Scottie, go on.
Well, and this is where I think you see the both ways. I have no problem. Let's talk about having male health. Let's start having those conversations about actually putting the priorities. But here is where the hypocrisy in the situation is, because at the same time, my body, my choice. And yet these same people are the ones that are actually here in America saying, you don't get any sort of care if you've not been vaccinated. You don't have a body or a choice when it comes to vaccines. But by golly, when it comes to actually killing a life after their heart is beating, that's all the woman's choice. Who gives that baby the choice? And if you are in an emergency situation like a rape, I guarantee you are watching what is going on with your body.
No,
you are making sure. I guarantee you're not just going to ignore your own health concerns for 6 weeks.
I'm sorry,
That's
cannot
not how it
guarantee
works.
anything of the sort. And this is you can't guarantee anything of the sort. And this is this is the issue. When women like you, Scottie, back these kind of indefensible bills, all you're doing is making it harder for other women to actually exercise their own free will. You don't get to tell another woman you should know what's going on with their body, because their body will tell them and they will know as and when their situation arises. It should be between them and their medical practitioner. It is not for you to point fingers at them. It is not for you to say to them, well, you should know. Well, to have 6 weeks, it's not.
Who speaks on behalf of their life? Once their heart is beating, who speaks on behalf of them? Who do they not get to say whether they get to live or not? Ask them. I guarantee they won't live. And
once this child, once this baby, once this fetus, you
Hold on a second, ladies. Don't talk over each other because we can't hear what both of you are saying. Scottie, you go.
I think that is the contrary. You have passions on both sides, but the fact is, this did not overturn Roe versus Wade. Plus, Roe versus Wade was not a part of the Constitution. It was a Supreme Court decision, just like how the Supreme Court decided, because this had gone through the legislative process correctly, that they could not overturn the legislative bill in Texas. So once again, this is not something that was a part of an amendment. This is not a part of a law. This is a Supreme Court decision, and the Supreme Court upheld what the Texas legislature did because it went through the process. Whether you agree with the outcome or not, it followed the rule of law.
Okay, Doctor, final word from you.
This was a Republican agenda from the start. And can I just correct you here and tell you again that this does overturn Roe v. Wade? Thank you for the concern for the fetus. But once that fetus is a born child, are you feeding that child? Are you supporting that child? Are you supporting the mother? Or as we've seen with Republicans, you're ready and happy for the mother and child to stew in poverty, in inequality, in injustice, all kinds of things. But right now, it's all about the fetus. And I'm saying that the hypocrisy is just profound. You have to leave women with their right, their fundamental right, to decide for themselves should they wish to birth a child, because they will be the ones to take care of that child.
Okay, we are out of time, ladies, but I must just let you come back on that point, Scottie, very quickly, please.
Well, it's very selective. Once again, my body, my choice, only when it in regards to one issue, not across the board. I think that's where the hypocrisy exists on this issue. Once again, it's whether you believe it's a baby when the heart is beating or if it's just some sort of fetus, like a piece of tissue. Two ways of looking at it.
Ladies, very emotive subject for both men and women alike. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. It's always great to see you both. Thank you. Now, on the 11th of September 2001, 4 commercial planes packed with passengers were hijacked and flown into targeted buildings in New York and Washington. One of them, as you know, was brought down in Pennsylvania by the passengers on board when they retook the plane from the hijackers. As we mark the 20th anniversary this week, I've spoken to the chief, Joseph Pfeiffer. He was a fire chief at the time of the New York Fire Department. He recalled leading the emergency response in the North Tower, all the while hearing people jumping from the floors above to their deaths.
They landed on a canopy over the front of the entrance to the lobby with a loud thud. And we knew that each thud was the end of a life.
More than 200 people jumped to their deaths from those twin towers before they collapsed. The cause of death recorded as blunt trauma as a result of homicide. And we'll have full coverage of the 9/11 attack 20 years on from 5 o'clock on Friday. I'll be in New York that evening, and again on Saturday morning, the day of the anniversary, from 9 a.m. And throughout the day, I'd be honoured if you could join me at one of those hours, or indeed if you'd like to stay with us throughout the course of the day as we hear the names read out of those that perished. Almost 3,000 people lost their lives. Among a host of others, I'll be speaking to George Pataki. He was the New York governor at the time, about his experience leading the state through the crisis. And as I said about 20 minutes ago, I'll also be talking to the mayor of Gander. Gander was the place in Canada where so many of the aeroplanes that couldn't go into US airspace, it was closed for 2 days, remember, at the time, didn't open again until the 13th of September. That's where all the planes landed. It was a tiny town of just 5,000 people, opened their doors to many, many thousands more until the airspace was reopened. Speaking to the mayor of Gander at the time over the weekend. Stay tuned for more on that. This hour, though, what next with the vaccine rollout? It's a question dividing the scientific community. We'll speak to Professor Sunetra Gupta next.
I witnessed how the Catalan fight for independence split families. It was from this chamber that Carles Puigdemont declared independence in October.
I come here because I want to show other people what happened.
I'm Michelle Clifford and I'm Sky's Europe correspondent. It's not the aim of the smugglers to actually get people to UK shores, but simply into British waters. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. There are real concerns here now about whether the health system will be able to cope. President Macron has spoken in defence of freedom of expression, saying France won't give up its caricatures and drawings made by people who dare to challenge. Afternoon, Mr. Barnier. How are you?
I have no time for any polemics.
Anger at the police, anger at the government, anger about wider social and economic problems in this nation.
We are on the verge of fascism and we have a country to save.
It was my vision to come and protect wildlife in the future.
Animals like lion can enter into bomas, they kill their livestock, and this leads to human-wildlife conflict.
Did you know that if we make small changes to our lives, we can reduce air pollution by loads? But how much? Exactly, loads.
Overnight fog will clear to brighter spells, but showers will break out widely today. Some of the showers will be heavy and thundery and could lead to localised flooding. Not as hot as yesterday, but still feeling rather humid. The far north and northwest of Scotland, cloudy with spells of rain. Taking a look at the daily air quality index, where levels of air pollution are bandied from 1 being low to 10 being very high, levels will be mostly low, with isolated pockets of moderate air pollution as unsettled weather sweeps northwards.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Government's announced a consultation into whether they should make the coronavirus vaccine mandatory for all frontline health and care staff. It's a question steeped in controversy, with fears of a looming staffing crisis. The thousands of currently unvaccinated NHS workers are banned from working. Let's talk about it in more detail. In fact, let's talk about it generally as far as the epidemiology of it is concerned. Dr. Sunetra Gupta is with us, Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at the University of Oxford. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. Let's talk about the vaccines and the boosters and comparing it and contrasting it with the vaccine for the flu, etc. All these things are what people are having to contend with at the moment. Break it down for us. What should we be thinking about?
Well, first of all, we should be thinking about what the vaccine actually delivers. And what we've done continuously throughout the course of this pandemic is take some of the wonderful tools that we have and push them to do what they can't do. So we have, for example, mathematical models, which are fantastic conceptual tools, and they've been pushed beyond their capacity to do what they can't do, which is to predict how many cases there'll be and how many deaths there'll be. We have vaccines which are meant to protect against disease and death amongst those who are vulnerable to those conditions. And instead, we've been pushing them to do what they can't do, which is protect against transmission. Once you take on board the fact that vaccines are supposed to protect against severe disease and death, and this was recognised by many people at the outset, including Kate Bingham, who said, we'll vaccinate everyone over 50, and then that's it, we've done our job. And the vaccines have done their job. They've been superlative in doing their job so far, and we're protecting people against severe disease and death. They were never meant to be used to stop transmission or to allow people in particular settings to make them risk-free. So it is really not logical to use vaccines to protect other people. The vaccine protects you, which, if you're vulnerable, is really a very, very valuable thing. What we really should be thinking... Sorry, yes, go ahead.
OK, so, Professor, I get that. So from what you're saying, can I extrapolate from that you don't think that NHS and care workers need to have vaccines unless they want to? You don't think they should be forced to?
I don't think they should be forced to, on the understanding, but simply because this vaccine does not prevent transmission. So if you just think of the logic of it, what is the point of requiring a vaccine to protect others if that vaccine does not durably prevent onward transmission of a virus? So, I mean, obviously there are all sorts of ethical and political issues surrounding this, but we can peel it right back to the logic. And the logic is simply not there. It's illogical to foist a vaccine upon people in the hope that you can reduce the transmission of disease. And we've seen that. It's been borne out, for example, in Israel, where cases are rising despite vaccination. The good news is that provided you've protected those who are vulnerable to disease and death, we don't need to worry. So we are unnecessarily inflicting upon ourselves this worry that we will be transmitting the virus to someone who's going to die.
OK. Professor, let me ask you about, in that case, let me move on to boosters. So if somebody has been double vaccinated, they are protected, more or less. But will those elderly people in care homes need to have booster jabs, and will the rest of us?
Well, that's a very good question. Again, if you think about, provided we focus on those who are vulnerable, it's a very good question about whether boosters may, in fact, enhance or maintain a longer-term protection against severe disease and death. And at the moment, the decision to try and boost immunity amongst those who, are obviously not mounting a strong immune response to the vaccine seems to me to be a logical risk to take. So there will be some small risk, at least, attached to further vaccination. But what we need, of course, are studies to see whether that small risk is outweighed by the advantage, which may be that it makes protection against severe disease and death more durable.
A final thought before I let you go, Doctor. Absolutely fascinating stuff, Professor. Should 12-year-olds be vaccinated?
I absolutely do not think that is logical at any level. I mean, leave alone the ethics of using 12-year-olds as barriers for infection for the community. The bottom line is that these vaccines do not prevent transmission. So these vaccines do not benefit. In the case of a 12-year-old, it benefits neither the individual, who is not at risk of severe disease and death, nor does it benefit the community. So all we're left with is a risk of vaccination. To ask children to bear that risk, to me, is just simply unacceptable.
And further than that, we had the Health Secretary on the programme yesterday morning, and he was saying that 12-year-olds should be able to override their anti-vax parents if they wanted to have the jab. Quick thought on that before I let you go.
Well, I find that very, very difficult to understand. Mostly we don't leave such decisions to 12-year-olds. And, we're not, if we were in a situation where there was a huge medical emergency, 12-year-olds were dying in droves, and we had to roll this out, we might consider such an extraordinary measure. But under these circumstances, where the vaccine is being offered to 12-year-olds to protect the community, given that most people are struggling with that concept, the idea that a 12-year-old would immediately be able to make a rational decision, given all the facts, is really kind of difficult to understand.
Professor, I'm so sorry we are out of time, but absolutely fascinating. Thanks for clearing up some of those subjects for us here on Sky News this morning. Thank you. Very quick look at the weather for you.